Yeah, hi, Dave Lonsworth here again. Lecture 2 for week 1, and this is actually going to be divided into 2 shorter lectures. So I don't know that I can have you sit through another 20-minute lecture. So this will be 10 minutes, hopefully, and I'm just going to cover these 2 items here at the top of this list today, and well, in this first lecture, and then the second lecture I'll do these 2 topics. So the subject is animal respiration, which is in the same chapter as circulation, and this logically connect to each other. So my first question is, what's the purpose of respiration? And of course, you could say, well, we need to get oxygen into the body, but that would be an oversimplification. It's certainly not something that I would consider suitable and sufficient for a group of students with your background. One answer is, well, we need oxygen because oxygen is the last electron acceptor in the electron transport chain, and it is required to most efficiently extract ATP energy from cellular respiration. That would be a reasonable answer. But you also must recognize that CO2 is being produced, and CO2 is also a gas that is part of the respiratory system, and one purpose of respiration is to get rid of CO2, which of course should beg the question, why? And here's a relationship, I did it again, a relationship between CO2, partial pressure of CO2 here, and pH here. And what you see is that the higher the CO2, the lower the pH. Why? You should all know why. What happens when CO2 mixes with water? You get an acid. Acid is H2CO3, carbonic acid, dissociates, produces H ions that increase the hydrogen concentration and decrease the pH in the medium, in this case blood. And of course you should then ask the question, well, why does pH matter? And I will say that is a good question. It's one that you should have an answer to. And I will simply say that has to do with proteins. All right, so purpose respiration, bring in oxygen for cellular respiration to generate ATP and to get rid of CO2. And I love this diagram here. This is a great one. You should be able to digest it, understand it. And these numbers here are partial pressures. So really just think of them as relative concentrations of the different gases. There's a lot of oxygen here, which hopefully makes sense. There's less oxygen down here. There's more carbon dioxide, less carbon dioxide, more. So all of this should make sense as you walk your way through the diagram. All right, now the rest of this lecture is devoted to this question. What are the physical factors that affect rates of gas exchange? And I'll begin with this diagram and then follow it with an equation. This equation is known as Fick's law of diffusion, and it describes for you and us some of the characteristics of a system that affect the rate at which gases move from one side to another side, from one surface, from one side of a surface to the other side of a surface, from the air into the body, for example. So you can look at this. You can also look at this. This is another way of presenting it. What I want you to think about is the variables here. And so we begin with J, which is flux. This is the rate at which material is moving. And then we have D, and expressed in a negative, with a negative sign, and you'll see why over there. And then D is the diffusion coefficient. This is just a number. It actually has units, centimeters squared per second, but it's it's really a product of a combination of things, and you'll see them here at the bottom of the screen. D increases with the solubility and temperature, and decreases with solvent viscosity and solute molecular weight. And then we also have DC, which is concentration gradient, which is the difference between one side and the other side of a surface for the gas or solute that you're interested in. And then there's d sub x, which is or dx, which is the diffusion distance. And you should understand how to use this. Like, for example, if I said, well, if the diffusion distance increased, what would that mean for the flux? If the concentration gradient increased, what would that mean for the flux? If the solute solubility increased or the temperature increased, what would that do to the flux? Those are the kinds of questions I'm going to ask you on an exam. Here's another way of thinking about it. So at a constant temperature, the rate of diffusion is proportional to the partial pressure gradient, how strong that gradient is, the cross-sectional surface area, solubility of the gas in the fluid, and inversely proportional to the diffusion distance, and also to the molecular weight of the gas or the solute. And that's not meant to be subsumed here. Actually, they're supposed to be equivalent, but Excel or PowerPoint messed up with my diagram. All right, so what am I going to ask you on a test question? I'm going to give you this equation, and I'm going to ask you if the diffusion coefficient increased, if solubility increased, temperature increased, if the diffusion distance increased, decreased, that sort of thing. What is the consequence on the flux rate? So the animals can actually affect these, the fluxes of gas. And one way to do that is by a process called bulk flow. So this is an animal creating a pressure gradient by moving large units or a bolus of gas into their body by pushing it. So here we see a frog. The frog inspires, so in this case actually creates a negative pressure in the mouth and a vacuum, so to speak, and that pulls air in. And then when the frog closes its mouth, it pushes the air through the trachea into the lungs, and that is therefore what's described as bulk flow. So animals can create pressure gradients. They can create pressure gradients that are negative by opening the mouth, drawing air in. They can create pressure gradients by pushing it with muscle contractions, as in this illustration. All right, moving on. So what's another way that animals can affect the flux rate? Well, they can increase the surface area, right? They can increase the surface area to volume ratio, and this is something that we've talked about before, and so I don't think I really need to spend any more time talking about it now. Actually, that's it. Wait a minute. Respiratory systems in animals. Oh, yeah. Ooh, this is a good way to finish it off. So one way to think about them is that small multicellular animals rely on diffusion for gas exchange. That is to say, across their body surfaces. They do not need specialized respiratory structures. Large organisms must rely on a combination of bulk flow and diffusion of gas. That is to say, they need a respiratory system, and you should have no difficulty in answering the question, why? Why is a small animal able to get away without a respiratory system, but a large animal needs one? And for now, that's it. I'm going to stop there, and I'll start the next slideshow after this.